Hello and welcome to another edition of Iowa's Agenda, cable television's public affairs program about Iowa's General Assembly. That's our legislature. The decisions to be made there and the people who make those decisions. We're in the second week of the General Assembly and things are hopping. In an attempt to get out early, we're passing legislation, and of course in an attempt to meet federal guidelines, we're passing legislation early. And the governor today signed the education bills into law. So we will be here today with two key members of the legislature. First, thank you for coming, Senator Robert Dvorsky. He is the chairman of Appropriations, considered one of the most important committees in the Capitol. He also is a member of Education, Rebuild Iowa, and Rules Administration committees. Mr. Dvorsky is from Coralville, Iowa, and I think you still work in community corrections.
I do.
And Representative Craig Paulson, who is the minority leader of the House of Representatives, a Republican from Hiawatha, and Representative Paulson is an attorney as well as a legislator. Representative Paulson, what does the minority leader do? Do you ascribe to the old story by a lobbyist who used to be speaker that the only job of the minority leader is to become the speaker?
Well, that's clearly one of the jobs, and is you work on making sure that the electorate has an opportunity to see a difference between the two parties, and then if the electorate decides, yes, then I suppose you switch offices. But I also think while we're in session, there's no question that one of the most important jobs I have is when those bills comes up that we have disagreements on, and we should have a heated debate on. We should have that. But though there are a good deal of legislation, in fact, the bulk of the legislation is things we shouldn't fight over, but rather just work towards good public policy. And it's also my job to make sure we're not fighting about things we shouldn't be fighting about.
Do you think in general this General Assembly is partisan or not? I mean, I've lobbied now in Democrat control, Republican control, split control. I don't think I see a trend for more or less partisanship than in the recent past.
I don't think it's terribly partisan. We are partisan, so that to some degree that's what we do. And as Senator Dvorsky says every now and then, it's hard to take the politics out of politics. But I think we actually work fairly well together.
Senator Dvorsky, what's the Appropriations Chair do? I told the viewer that it's one of the most important committees up there. Why? And what's your job as Chair of the Appropriations Committee?
Well, the basic job is to make sure we get a budget. I mean, we can do a lot of things during the session, but the one thing you have to do is do a budget. And as they say, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. So the governor proposes his budget, and then the Appropriations Committee goes to work, and we actually pass a budget. Actually, it's 7 different budgets. There are appropriations subcommittees, 7 of those that meet for several days early in the session, and then they come up with different bills for 7 different bills for those 7 appropriations subcommittees. So we work with the appropriations subcommittees, we work with the governor's office, we work with our leadership, both the House and Senate, and all work together trying to craft a budget. One of the biggest things we do is we come up with something called targets. And that's the bottom line number of each of these appropriations subcommittees, that they can't go beyond that number. And we give those targets out, and then they work within those targets.
Now, you've started a lot of work on these budgets, but don't you have to wait for the March Revenue Estimating Conference?
Well, technically the December one is the number we're supposed to use, but I think this year, unfortunately because of the big drop in revenue, we may be looking at the March one also and see what happens in March.
Is it your hope that things will improve by March? I mean, I keep hearing the economy's improving, and in some ways it's you can see it, but in other ways, unemployment, et cetera, do we have any hope that numbers will get better for March?
The state receipts revenues are, I don't know how you put this, they're not dropping as such a high rate as they were before. So that means they're coming up slightly at this point.
I want to ask you a different question, and then we'll move on to the budget, and then I'll ask Representative Paulson this as well. Yesterday, a surprise, maybe not if you were paying attention to the race, but a surprise to most people, that Ted Kennedy's seat went Republican. Is this a sign of the times? The 2010 election throughout the country and in Iowa is going to turn Republicans back into control?
I think it's a sign of the times that people, there definitely seems to be some sort of anti-incumbent out there, and I assume they sort of viewed the Democratic candidate, Martha Coakley, as maybe sort of an incumbent, even though she hadn't served. She certainly was an incumbent statewide office holder. But I think, you know, a lot of things really happen based on individual candidates and races also. So I think there isn't a particularly good mood right now, but it also is a lot of it's based on who the candidate is.
Sorry for coughing.
All right.
But I understand your answer, and Coakley had her challenges. But it does seem like it's just a surprise in Massachusetts. What are your thoughts about the Massachusetts election?
Well, I mean, obviously, Republicans across the country, conservatives across the country are excited about it. I think there's probably a couple lessons that come out of it. One is nobody should take their seat for granted, right. And she seemed to take her position to some degree or the opportunity to win at least for granted. At least that's the way it came off in the press. I think the other thing you see is there is a great deal of frustration with government right now at every level, local, state, and at the federal level. And I think it's especially important that elected officials right now speak clearly and then follow through on the actions that they commit to.
What's the reason for that? Why is there all this frustration with government now?
You know, if I was to sum it up in a sentence, government's doing too much, too fast, and the electorate just, you know, slow down. Yes, we'd like some things to change, but the things that we want to change aren't necessarily what's being talked about. Great deal of irritation with the $300 million that they sent down to Louisiana to buy Senator Landrieu's vote. A great deal of frustration with the payoff to Senator Nelson over in Nebraska. That has nothing to do with the merits of the bill, although I think there's also some frustration with that. And it really started late last summer, and it manifested itself when the congressional members returned back for their town hall meetings in August. And there's the last thing I'd say on that, there's a perception out there that Republicans orchestrated those efforts to turn people out to those town hall meetings. Anybody believes that is not paying attention, because they were not orchestrated.
I also wonder whether it's actually, in the end, that teabag movement is going to be good for Republicans. I mean, like Mel Martinez in Florida may not be the nominee when it's all said and done for the Senate.
The Tea Party patriots, you know, their issue is fiscal conservatism, no question about it. As far as taxed enough already, I'd absolutely agree with that.
Senator DeBourcy, you want to jump in with anything?
Well, I think there is some frustration with maybe too much change at once, and I believe today, the 20th, is a one-year anniversary of President Obama being inaugurated, and we had the privilege and honor to be out there for that. So I think there were so many things that needed to be dealt with, and we're trying to take on so many things, and so much change at one time that really has got people a little nervous about various things. And then, frankly, the whole process of sausage making in Congress, it really, you know, it makes people nervous. Back to the election, though, and we had by the way, Democrats lost in Massachusetts, but we had a special election in Johnson County. We elected a Democratic supervisor, so we're happy about that. So anyway, but
there is a surprise.
Right. Well, she worked very hard anyway. So anyway, and there was a lot of money spent in the race. So anyway, one of the things that I thought was interesting in 1994, when I ran for the Iowa Senate and picked up part of Lynn County, I made some rounds and talked to some of the elected officials, and I talked to a guy who'd been county recorder for like 28 years, and to get suggestions on what you do, and he says, always run scared, hard, and humble. And I think sometimes candidates forget those things, or part of them, and that's what you need to do every time that happens. You need to do that.
Representative Paulson, did you support the education bills which were passed in the first week of session and signed by the governor today?
Well, there was 4 education bills. The first 2 dealt with setting allowable growth, one of them for the school foundation formula, which is the per pupil aid that we set.